Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today, and thank you very much for joining us. We're delighted to have you here for the latest Procurement Leaders webinar. We're going to be looking at revolutionizing contract management to empower the entire enterprise. Now, this is an important topic realistically when you look at some of the issues that are facing businesses today. Businesses have been, here in 2020, when I'm sitting here recording this, have been disrupted, endless measures. And remote working continues to change how we do business, and of course it changes how we think about contracts. So this really is what we wanted to kind of dig into today. We've pulled together a great panel. We've partnered with Agiloft, and we're delighted to have them here today to bring you this topic. Why are we talking about this? So realistically, we want to cover a few things. We want to look at how you can learn how your contract process can integrate with other departments, so you can have one secure system to improve efficiency. Because realistically right now, when we're talking about visibility, we're talking about governance, there isn't room for things to be slipshod. You need to have that kind of capacity. We also want to look at how you can think about visibility, because realistically the name of the game at the moment is risk and understanding risk, and having the right CLM in place and using it in the right way is going to be key to that and managing that element of risk. And finally, okay, so thinking about this, we're all aware of the possibility of technology, but how can you think about that in terms of implementing, in terms of building a business case? So there's quite a lot to cover today. I will say this a few times, but obviously we really want to hear some questions from you. If you're sitting here listening to us live today and you think, yep, I can relate to some of those challenges, how do you think about this? We would love to hear from you. So do get your questions in at any point. I'll keep reminding you guys. But I'm delighted to kind of pull together the panel. Let's meet them briefly. So you'll be hearing me speaking a bit. I'm Steve Hall, Director of Partnerships and Digital Engagement here at Procurement Leaders. I'm really pleased to have with me. So we're going to be hearing from Hiro Notani, VP of Marketing with Agiloft. We'll be hearing from Hiro in just a moment. I'm delighted to have him join the panel. And we're going to get a bit of kind of real life, how did you do this experience with Matt Latham, Purchasing Manager with Amerisure Insurance. Really pleased to have Matt join us here today. So thanks both for our panel for making the effort. Hopefully you guys have got a few questions in mind you want to kind of pick up with them. We'll be hearing a little bit them talk through their stories, talk a little bit through what they're seeing in the market and how they're responding. But at any point today, don't hesitate. You can put your questions in. Use the chat box you can see on your screen there. Send your questions and we will get them to our panel. We're obviously going to be asking you, making additional resources available, making slides available post-event. We often get asked about that, so just reassuring you, you're going to see some slides available later on as part of the follow-up, and we'll be asking you for your feedback later on as well. So do stick around. We've got under an hour here, but we're excited about what we're going to be able to do with it and the ground we're going to be able to cover. Beyond that, I think I just want to take the moment to welcome our wonderful speakers. So welcome to Matt and Hiro. I think, Hiro, we're going to start with you. We're very keen to hear what you've got to say. So why don't you start off maybe telling us a little bit more about Agiloft?
Thanks, Steve. It's been quite a ride this year. We just received a $45 million growth equity investment from FTB Capital. This is our Series A, so our first ever investment. We've been bootstrapped up until now, so excited to spend that money. Also highlights from this year, Gartner recognized us as a leader in its first Magic Quadrant for CLM, and then a few weeks later, Gartner's Critical Capabilities report came out, and we were the top-rated CLM vendor in all of the use cases that they covered: procurement, sales, legal, and enterprise. Spend Matters also rated us as the value leader for CLM in its 2020 CLM Solution Map report. Plus, icing on the cake, we got a Stevie for our AI engine. So a good year, and I won't go into sales pitch mode much more than that. What your audience is really interested in is how contract management software can help them and their organizations. So I'd like to start there. So who benefits from CLM? Different stakeholders get different value from CLM. In terms of the general counsel or the legal department, they're most interested in visibility into exposure and the tools that reduce risk. They also get more efficient use of their legal staff, mostly in terms of attorney man hours. From a sales or chief revenue officer perspective, The big advantage of contract management is that it eliminates revenue leaks and it closes deals faster because it reduces a lot of the red tape associated with getting contracts signed. From a CFO perspective, the CFO is most interested in visibility into the cost structure and long and short-term commitments, so they get a pretty good view with contract management software. Also of interest to the CFO is savings for making the process more efficient. So there are benefits across the enterprise, but let's zoom in on procurement because I think that's what this audience is about. So Matt will cover some of these areas in more depth, but here's what we see customers getting, where we see customers getting the most value out of procurement. Firstly, CLM automates a lot of processes like vendor onboarding, approval workflows, reporting, and so on, and these result in major efficiencies. It also enables you to better assess vendors, negotiate more favorable deals, and most importantly, track obligations to make sure you're getting what you paid for. A system that integrates with your ERP will also give you the ability to see all the information that's important to you in a single pane of glass. So I'm just going to turn it back over to you, Steve.
Excellent. And, you know, it's important to be kind of aware of how CLM kind of, as you say, empowers procurement. I like that word. That's what it's about, really. It's empowering. But, you know, it's important that we look at this in terms of real-life application as well. You know, how does this work? So I'm pleased here to bring in Matt Latham. And Matt, I'm hoping you're going to talk specifically about, you know, installing the system, how that's impacted AmeriSure Insurance. So maybe a good starting point, maybe you can start a little bit about the company and why you implemented a CLM system.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. So my name is Matt. Again, I'm with AmeriSure Mutual Insurance Company. And just a little scope so you understand the context that I'm coming from. We're a leading producer of commercial insurance, so we're focused exclusively on commercial insurance. We really specialize in a wide range of businesses, but we're really strong in construction and manufacturing, healthcare. We can do business in all 50 states. We're licensed to do business in all 50 states. We've been doing this for over 100 years with over 750 employees. Our headquarters are in Farmington Hills, Michigan, which is about half an hour, 40 minutes west of Detroit. But we have 13 other core service centers throughout the country, servicing the Midwest, the East, and we're starting to move out west as well.
So great, Matt. So why were you in the market for a CLM system? What were some of the pain points that prompted you to consider CLM?
So the primary thing we were looking at when we were looking at our contracts was our existing systems and how we wanted to transform our approach to vendor relationships. I think a lot of people on the call will probably be familiar with the idea that in many cases our vendor relationships are very much moving from transactional to strategic, or from short-term to long-term relationships. And as we started looking at that, and as we started consolidating our vendor pool to minimize some of the risks that are associated with a broad vendor pool, we recognized that we wanted to enhance the business user experience and enhance the business user's knowledge base. So our existing system, which was a fully legal controlled process around storage and distribution of contracts, really wasn't sufficient to put our business owners in the driver's seat as it relates to controlling the contract and the relationship. So we recognized that a CLM would probably do that for us. So we really looked at it from a bunch of different directions. We looked at the business owner's decisions and saying, okay, well, a good way to educate the business owner on their key decision points in a contract, so service levels, deliverables, milestones for statements of work, that needed to be in the business owner's hands, and the best way for us to do that is to give them a CLM where they have constant access to the contract. Moreover, if we really wanted to track performance, Hiro kind of alluded to it earlier, but if we wanted to track performance to the contract and continual performance to the contract, not just one snapshot in time, we would need a single source of truth, a repository where those notes relative to a contract could be stored. Previously, when business owners were doing that, they'd be storing it in their own systems or they'd be stored in their email. So we really wanted one central location, especially as we started engaging in more relationships that cross departments. So where I have my corporate underwriting group and my marketing group and my claims group all using a vendor for different engagements, we wanted one source of truth so that everyone could see how that vendor was performing on each of those, even if it wasn't their department, because it does speak to broader vendor performance and vendor relationship concerns. And we also wanted to put the tools in the hands of the business owners to properly end a relationship with a supplier, specifically as it relates to reclaiming confidential information, but also any other lessons learned throughout the course of that performance. As many of you will know, a lot of times when you're ending a relationship with a supplier, you're still doing whatever that thing was that the vendor's doing, but maybe you're just switching suppliers. Well, having a repository for lessons learned on the previous supplier and a way to link the two together so that you know that it's one business process that's being managed now by a different vendor is incredibly powerful when crafting the next set of contracts for that. So to kind of sum up, our biggest pain points were really wanting that one source of truth on contracts, both during the negotiations and then throughout the life cycle of the contract. And we wanted all the key people and only the key people to have access to those contract terms throughout its life cycle so that it wasn't wasting a lot of time, one person having to ask somebody else, can we do this under the contract? You'd know what all of those are. Or, hey, I just got a price increase from the vendor. Are they allowed to do that? Right? You don't have to bounce it over the wall a couple of times. It's in one key place where everyone can get access to it.
Great. So you identified a need. How did you go about getting the budget to install a system, Matt?
Yes. It's good to want, right? So once we determined that the organization would benefit from doing this and that we wanted to use contract lifecycle management as a business process transformation tool, not just a database, we really started building the business case to try to get the budget to do this. So we decided to really focus on two key areas, and the first was documenting waste. In a lot of cases, when we're talking about efficiency gains, that can feel very qualitative to decision makers, and we wanted to make it quantitative. So we looked at any place where our current contracting process was producing waste. So it could be time in legal. We have in-house legal at AmeriSure, so time in the legal department. And that waste not just with the attorneys, but with all the administrative costs around moving those contracts around too. And also, since we knew that we wanted to enhance the business user's knowledge base, we really were looking at where the current waste was coming from relative to teaching them. And the case we made then was, with access to analogous contracts, the business owner would start to really build an understanding of what is kind of reasonable to ask for during a negotiation, or what can be expected. So, if right now the contract says that you'll have 98% uptime on your cloud application, right? How does that compare to other cloud applications that we use in other parts of the business? Or how does it compare with cloud applications within the same group, right? Does my digital advertising firm going to give me the same upside as my achievement software, right? So really giving the ability of the business to learn on their own through analogy. And then ultimately kind of give visibility to the business owner at all steps of the relationship. So a lot of where we get stuck a lot is that people never knew who to ask to find out where a contract was in the contracting process. So we wanted something with a graphical interface or some easy way for the business owner to look and say, oh, it's illegal. Oh, the vendor has it. Oh, we're on our third pass going back and forth with the vendor, right? We wanted something very easy to do that. And we wanted something that would integrate with our signature package, which is DocuSign, so that they could also track that. So you're not asking 5 people, hey, have you signed my contract yet? You know exactly whose signature you're waiting on and how long it's been there. So once we documented all that waste and our goals for eliminating that waste, the other piece we wanted to look at was how easy was this going to be to implement, whose resources are going to be consumed to do that, and then how do you continuously develop this? Because what we didn't want as a business was we didn't want a CLM just to be a snapshot in time. We didn't want it to be configured for whatever our needs are today, and then it stays static that way. We wanted the ability for it to grow. So key drivers for us in building the business case was finding a supplier that would first provide us with enough resources to do the implementation, a software that could be implemented with minimal IT resources, that could be owned by business owners. In this case, it's joint owned by legal and procurement. And then ultimately, could we define what that minimum viable product would be? So what should we launch with so we can implement quickly? And then also we could build the capabilities to do enhancements ourselves, development ourselves, and a company that had a roadmap going forward that was also looking at how they can expand the power of CLM or the value of CLM over time.
So great. So obviously you picked Agiloft. So it'll be interesting to hear from you, Matt, on now that you've installed the system, tell us a little bit about your implementation experience with Agiloft, and more importantly for this audience, what kind of results have you seen?
Sure. So we made the business case. We got the budget. It actually wasn't all that difficult once we went through it to get the preliminary budget for the search. And then we looked at 7 CLMs, narrowed it down to 2 or 3 for finalists. We did one wave of demos, another wave of demos. Then we did some targeted discussions on implementation, future roadmap, those sorts of things. And Hero kind of spoiled the headline, but yes, we did eventually select Agiloft. So then we signed that contract in March of 2018, and we launched on August 1st. We had a small team of internal implementers, and we had one implementer from Agiloft. And using just those resources, we were able to launch in 4 months. But we were able to do that because we made the decision not to spend time migrating our 2,000 contracts over into Agiloft. We decided to say that August 1st, every contract that got initiated from August 1st on was going to go into our CLM. And then our approach to older contracts would be to go to the business, because remember, we're doing this as a business transformation exercise as well. Go to the business and say, hey, grab all your contracts that are valuable to you from legal, and we'll use this as additional training to get them into Agiloft. And then we always had the fallback position, too, of any contracts that were renewals or amendments to existing contracts. If they weren't already in the CLM as of August 1st, we would upload those as the parent and then attach the amendments or renewals or change orders as we went. We did all of our training in-house. Our implementation, and I'll probably touch on this a little bit later, but our implementation was very much not a chuck it over the wall sort of implementation. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that each of you would have to make when you're thinking about how you want to implement, we decided that we wanted to make sure that we had the knowledge to do sort of things that we were asking our implementer at Agiloft to do. So we would tell them, hey, we would want, Jennifer was her name. We'd tell Jennifer, hey, Jennifer, we're looking for this functionality. So she'd come back to us in a couple of days. Okay, I made the switches, and now you can see it work. And I'd say, great. So show us how you did that. Like, what did you change? Where did you go in Agiloft to make those changes so that during the implementation, we were building the internal knowledge so that if I had to build a button to do something, I could do it myself. Or if I wanted to add a new metadata field, I could do that myself. So because of that approach, and because of the way we trained it, and then we did training in July, and then in August and September, as people were loading in their old contracts, they were kind of learning by fire. We've been able to achieve an adoption rate of over about 90%. And I should probably clarify that. So previously, contracts got to legal by a variety of ways. Somebody could walk a printed contract and drop it on one of my attorney's desks. They could send them an email. The attorney might have been part of the conversations leading up to the contract, so they might have gotten it that way. So by now, what we've done is we've used the end user licenses in Agiloft to allow our business owners to enter contract requests for legal review themselves. So at 90%, what I mean is 90% of the contracts that get to my attorneys get there by the business owners entering them into Agiloft themselves. The other 10% is people still using the older methods of, well, I just need this in a hurry and I don't have time to put it in. So at that point, then legal then kicks it back to me and the business owners to sit down and retrain the business owner on getting it into it the correct way. So 100% of the contracts end up in CLM before they're reviewed by legal, but over 90% of them are getting in on the first pass by the business owner.
That's incredible. Sorry, Matt,
well,
just say that's an incredible adoption rate.
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
Again, because it's pretty easy to do. One of the things you'll want to look at with your CLM is that initial metadata, like how much do you want to capture, and don't get drunk on power. Meaning, if you're not going to actually use something as a reporting hook or a search hook, you don't necessarily have to make the business owner extract it. But yeah, it's because it's gotten to the point where the tools are so valuable to them that getting that adoption wasn't too difficult. Plus, we really did tell them, hey, this is the only way we're going to accept contracts. So, but the human way to do it was, if somebody gets it by a way that isn't Agiloft, they ping me and the other admins as training resources, and then we'll wander over to the person's desk and say, you know what, let me give you another 20 minutes on how to get this in. So it's worked really well that way. And I kind of implied it, but because we did it that way, the business owner's investment in contracts has gotten a lot bigger, and their knowledge has grown. So as a procurement person, it has made future negotiations a lot easier because the business owner is really getting their hands around what kind of parts of a contract are and should be negotiable, and what is their power to do it, and what's been done in the past. So when we're talking about lifecycle management, remember, we're talking about the entire lifecycle. That's negotiation, and that's all the way through performance. So they've got notes on how the vendor's performing now to make for a really invested business owner in terms of, well, I really know what the performance of that vendor is, and it helps us fight the recency bias that often comes in it. And kind of from that same thing, broader than just contracts, it's really grown an understanding of risk. So not just your basic understanding of contract risk, but also data security risk or privacy and compliance risk. By making them a real part of the contract and not just chucking it over to legal, it's grown an understanding of, okay, so what do you mean I should be concerned about exporting my data overseas? Or, all right, what do you mean that flying this drone over this site might create privacy issues? It opens up those kind of conversations. And really, just kind of taking recent circumstances into account, because of the workflow system in Agiloft and because we eliminated all those handoffs, we've had zero interruption in the contracting process because of the pandemic. Moving to a mostly remote, because we're now in a mostly remote, like most people, mostly remote workspace, because the workflows and automations are all in the CLM system. Contracts move from step to step the same way they would if I was sitting at my desk at work versus whether I'm sitting at my desk at my den.
Right. Thanks, Matt. Sounds like you're getting the value from the CLM you set out to get. Actually, you'd be surprised at how much time and effort goes into processing contracts. I'm just going to cite an IACCM study that put the average cost of processing a contract at $6,900. So that can add up pretty quickly. Steve?
And Hero, I know that you guys have done some work around quantifying the value of CLM as well. We were talking about the cool ROI calculator that you guys have got. I think it may be a good time to talk through that.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. So Steve talked about this ROI calculator that we developed. We basically used industry benchmarks to build an ROI calculator that quantifies the value organizations can expect to receive from CLM. So the research had identified 5 areas of value. The first is operational efficiencies. This is mostly about legal man-hours spent reviewing contracts, redlining, approving, things like that. The Goldman Sachs estimates automation of this process saves 20% of budget, And when we surveyed our customers, we found that that was a consistent finding. Our customers were saying about 20% was right. What do you think about that number, Matt? Is that consistent with what you found?
Yeah, it's consistent to at times a little light. Like when we first started, like after about 6 months, I went back and had a good interview with my legal team on what kind of efficiencies were they seeing from it, and they were. When we start looking at the data, because we weren't really collecting data pre-Agilov, but I'd say it's closer to the 25 to 35% efficiency increase or a speed increase for processing contracts.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys are a little bit more on the ball too. So, it's not surprising that you get a better return. A second area of value was purchasing, which is the efficiencies from streamlining vendor operations, everything from onboarding vendors, managing obligations. So a Hackett Group study estimated companies could save 12% or should save 12% from procurement. From our surveys, our customers were able to identify an average of 8% savings. Matt, just from a purely procurement perspective, what would you estimate your savings to be?
So that's a little more difficult to quantify because our increase in value on the procurement side has really come from smarter and faster negotiation stances. So because we're capturing vendor performance as a continuous stream, not just a snapshot in time, we're able to actually do better negotiations. So if you get to the end of a contract, which we just had, a couple months ago, and it got to an end of a contract and our business user had captured notes about performance and they were convinced that the vendor was great, right? But when you look at 2.5 years before that, it took them 2.5 years of a 3-year contract to get to the point where we would say that. So whereas previously we would have been kind of hamstrung by recency bias relative to how we wanted to negotiate, by all that lifecycle information in one place, we're actually negotiating smarter, and it's putting us in a position where instead of having to have 6 negotiations to get to the end of a contract, we're usually 2 or 3 will get it there, and the same is true with red lines too. So I think the number you're showing there is probably accurate, and I'll need more data on the purchasing side to really know the dollar savings, like the actual, hey, I got 5% more out of this contract because we capture that information. We've certainly had moments like that, though, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky to measure all of this stuff. So I know this audience is primarily procurement, but enterprise contract management also saves in sales operations. And this is about reducing the red tape salespeople have to complete before getting an agreement signed. For them, the killer app is one-click contract creation and approval. I'm just going to quote IACCM study again. They estimate that companies are leaving up to 9% of revenue on the table due to poor contract management practices. So 9% is a big number. Our customers were able to positively identify 3% of revenue, but even at 3%, for a $100 million company, $3 million a year is not insignificant, and it pays for a contract management system many times over. Actually, one of our customers was telling us that before automating the process, it took more than a month to get a standard sales contract signed after all the terms had been agreed on. I don't have to tell you guys that a lot can happen in a month, like a global pandemic. So the fourth and fifth values associated with automating CLM are security and regulatory compliance. And for our customers, many of our customers said the message was that they valued security and compliance more than the efficiency benefits that I just talked about. So in a lot of cases, it was the driver for considering a CLM system. And speaking of security, here's some food for thought. I was talking to an IDC analyst for legal ops not long ago, and he told me that one of the primary issues he's hearing from lawyers right now during the pandemic is the difficulty accessing contracts because they're stored in file cabinets on computer desktops, emails, etc. So that could be a security nightmare. Anyway, over to you, Steve.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, guys, I think you've done a really good job of, talking us through, what we're calling, revolutionizing, right? We're revolutionizing contract management here, and it's really interesting to kind of hear how you've approached that, Matt, and how Agile have supported that. You can see we've had some questions in, guys. If you're sitting here listening and you have questions, you want to know more, now's a good time. Put those in. We'll be getting to the Q&A section in just a moment. Before we get that, though, and I think this might answer some of people's questions, if people are thinking about taking the next step, let's think about what they might need to know about how they're going to choose, how they're going to implement a system. Matt, you've talked us through the success that you guys have had. Can you offer us any advice on that side?
Absolutely. So one of the things we look at when making the case for CLM, or when you've already made the case and you're looking at implementing, is really look at as much data as you can. And not necessarily rely on user stories. So user stories certainly will lead you in a particular direction, but the way memory works is that most people will remember the big bombastic things and not the volume of things. So I might have, and I recently had a 6-month negotiation on a really important contract. It took us 6 months to finally get to the end solution that we were getting at. It would be easy to look at that and say, okay, well, all my contracts of this type, or all my contracts to this group, are going to be like that. Whereas if I looked at the data, I would see that no, 90% of the contracts that come through underwriting are, classic, 3 to 4 week negotiations with an execution at the end, not 6 months long. So really focus on collecting as much of the broad data as you can. It'll help you find the places that you really need extra focus. Another one to look at too is when you're looking at a CLM system, and there's quite a few of them out there, you'll want to look at one that has Agile application. I don't necessarily mean Agile in the methodology of Agile, but has the ability to give you more than what you're expecting up front. And that you can turn off the things that you don't want. The last thing you want to do is you don't want to overwhelm your business owners with a bunch of things that they don't understand. You can really focus on just the aspects of CLM that you want to implement with a plan to roll out additional elements. So I do that now probably every 3 to 4 months. I'll send a note out to the power users of my system, which is between 30 and 50 people in my organization, to say, hey, okay, so I heard you, and I've added this button to make your life easier, or I've added this bit of automation. You'll want a system that can do that, but use the data to determine what that initial scope will look like. And the best way to do that is to ask good questions inside your organization. So make sure you identify all the key stakeholder groups that are going to access it. If you want to focus on the business owners like I did, certainly go around and start having conversations and ask questions of the business owners of what they're looking for. But be really careful. One of the things when I look back on my lessons learned for implementing a CLM is because I wanted to use this and I had a bias toward using this as a business user transformation tool to get them more involved in both the contracting process and the procurement process, I didn't spend enough time with my legal team on how they wanted to interact with the system. So a lot of my first month of go live in the system was really sitting down with the attorneys, getting some quality of life improvements for them, and then being able to execute them, which kind of harkens back to my original point about make sure that if that's something you're interested in, being able to do that inside your organization rather than inside an IT group or what have you, or paying somebody else to do it. Make sure you build up some of that knowledge base, or contract with a company that is going to have an extensive knowledge base that you can draw from to do those improvements.
I just find this, it's really interesting to hear, given the role that you have, Matt, but we sometimes hear this, that people who do this well, they know how to approach this as a solution and a piece of software, right? So you're thinking about, as you said, about Agile, you're thinking about the balance between data and user journeys, as you described, and that kind of idea of, ask the right questions is fundamental to it. And I think people listening might be wise to kind of think about how Matt's team approach this, because that really is the key to kind of getting this right. You have to have the right mindset in how you approach it. Hero, let's look at the other angle though, right? Because we often talk about how wonderful software can be, but you've got to get it right. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you see any pitfalls that people might be able to anticipate?
Yes, so that good question, Steve. So the first thing I would do is I'd encourage you to start with a few questions of your own. Matt talked about asking the right questions, and I think these are some of the questions you might want to ask. First, you need to be clear about the benefits you expect. So what is your primary motivation for buying a system? Is it to save money from vendors? Is it to minimize legal or regulatory exposure? Or is it a full enterprise system that integrates with your ERP and CRM to give you all the data you need in a single pane of glass? Your immediate need is going to, will, to a large extent, determine the type of system you choose. But other things to keep in mind when you're choosing a system, after you've answered those questions: scalability. There's nothing wrong with starting small and working out the kinks before you make a big investment. But if you do start with a small or with a department-specific system, make sure the system you choose scales both to other departments, because I guarantee you're going to want to extend this across the enterprise, and will scale with you as your company grows. You don't want to rip out and replace just when you're deriving the benefits of the system. Other factors, usability and customizability. Just as important as the features will be how usable the system is. And like with any software, user adoption will play a role in how successful your deployment is. I mean, Matt was able to achieve 90% adoptability within literally a few months of installing the system. I don't even know if it's a few months, maybe a few weeks. If you can achieve that kind of user adoption, you will know that your system is successful. Because if people don't use it, it doesn't matter how great the software is. And then customizability. I think you should consider customizability as a component of usability. Matt talked about being able to add buttons, features, as his users sort of got used to the system and wanted different features out of it. He was able to do that easily himself. People don't want to change their established work processes to accommodate new software. So the more easily the software can be adapted to the way your teams work, the better. And in terms of implementation considerations, I think implementation is just as important as the software itself. So make sure you do your due diligence. Matt, you may have some specific...
Yeah, Hero, can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought this up because it's something I forgot to kind of hit on. So you'll want to have a sense from an organizational standpoint of what you're looking for from the implementation. If you're looking to be delivered a turnkey product, then make sure that when you're interviewing CLMs, you're interviewing them on their implementation approach. One of the things that really stood out to us when we were looking at Agiloft, and mind you, this was when my company was just starting an agile journey, so we were also kind of learning the language. But make sure when you interview them specifically on the topic of implementation, so that you know you're going to get somebody whose implementation approach matches how you want to do it. So we got a real strong sense from Agiloft that they were on board and understood why we wanted to do a very participative and under the hood implementation, and it wasn't going to be a sign and deliver. But it's totally okay if that's what you want. But make sure that you interview your CLM specifically on that. Like I mentioned earlier, when we had the list of 7, we just looked at demos. When we cut it down to 2 or 3, we had targeted meetings on specific things. And with each of the finalists, we had a targeted meeting about the implementation approach and making sure that it met what I was looking for in terms of a learning and participative approach. So yeah, I think that's something to absolutely keep in mind when considering a CLM.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'll just add here, it's a little pitch, but I will add here that Agiloft is the only CLM supplier to offer a complete satisfaction guarantee on both license and implementation. So you can if you go with Agiloft, you can be sure you're going to be successful. So other things to add or to think about when implementing a system: security. Make sure the system has security, robust security protocols, and auditability. And then finally, cost. Obviously, it's not the only factor, but it is an important consideration. So that's what I would say. Back to you, Steve.
Awesome, great stuff. So I think now let's bring our audience in, guys. You've been putting your questions in, which has been great. Thank you for those. But let's see if we can kind of ask you something. Why not? Question for you, the audience. If you're listening today, why don't you let us know what you think. What aspects of CLM have the biggest impact on your work? We'll have a look at the results in a moment, but I just want to give you a moment to kind of have a look at those. Contract approvals, custom workflows, supplier onboarding, tracking performance, compliance, all of the above. Maybe you don't have a system. So we really want to hear from you. Do take a moment, just kind of click whichever option you want and you think that's most relevant. And let's give you just another moment, and maybe we'll have a little look at the results, guys. I'm going to bring you back in and see if we can kind of get your perspective on there. Wow, okay, so I was going to ask you if you were surprised. It really does split. Look at that. Not many have a system. And then, perhaps all that do say it's kind of doing everything for them. Maybe here I'll come to you first. Are you surprised that there's a reasonable percentage that don't have a system in place? Would you expect that?
Well, that's interesting. It's good for us, right, that we have that many, but that don't have a system. And I think that makes some sense. If you're considering a system, you would probably want to be on this call. So I think, so just to answer that question, Gartner did a study and they found that 85% of enterprises don't have an enterprise CLM system. So I guess I'm not that surprised that a lot of people don't have a system. But Gartner also said that they expect by 2023 that number will flip and 90% of enterprises will have a CLM system. So I think that it's something that a lot of people are considering right now.
And you can see there, guys. I mean, if you're watching this live, we just wanted to obviously everybody took a moment to kind of consider their options. So the data that's just flashed up is slightly newer, but I think the hero's point definitely still stands. Maybe Matt, I could ask you, particularly that point around contract approvals, custom workflows being a big impact. That was definitely something you saw, right, as you were kind of implementing. Would you be surprised to see, people listening today say that aspect of CLM had a big impact?
Oh, sure. To be honest with you, I'm not surprised also that people haven't necessarily looked at a CLM. I remember when we first started looking at it, like we put together a vendor management team comprised of our IT security team, our legal team, our project management team, finance, and internal audit. When we first started saying, boy, we really want to improve business owner interaction with contracts, as soon as we brought up CLM, the whole room went, oh man, we're never going to be able to afford that. We're not going to be able to put that out there. And it wasn't really until we did the research and realized that it really can be reasonable, especially as you define scope and then grow into it. But certainly, I think the initial impact, that first big win that the organization will feel will be from those workflows and the transparency of the process. Right? People a lot of times will look at attorneys as a kind of a scary black box that they don't understand. But once you start being able to see how your contract is flowing through the system, it takes a lot of those concerns away and builds a much better relationship between the legal team and the business owners, or the procurement team and the business owners.
And you've been through it. You would know. That's great. That's a great answer. Okay, guys, let's, I think we've got about 15 minutes left. Very keen to get to some of those audience questions. There's been a bunch of them in. I think that, I'm going to try and group a few things together, try and see if we can get a few of these in. So one question I wanted to come to you with, Matt, and a few things are kind of encompassed within this, I think, from what people have asked. So you mentioned about the vendor roadmap, and that was one of your criteria for selecting software. Can you give us an idea of what capabilities you've been looking for? People have been asking a little bit around how you considered it, how you made that decision. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Oh, sure. So right now, I'll give you two easy examples. The first one is we looked at contract management, as the contracts, but also as people will know, with contract management comes a couple of other processes that can run parallel. So, for example, if you're contracting with a supplier that requires an insurance certificate to be sent every year, right? That's a really annoying manual process. A lot of companies will have those on spreadsheets, and they'll have a once a year request, or everyone asks their vendors to send it in, but sometimes you got to follow up on that. So I was looking at a system that could look at follow-up documentation, and that could be everything from ongoing things like the insurance certificates, or like a certificate of destruction. So what I wanted to automate was when I get to the end of a life cycle of a contract, I wanted to be able to store the certificate of destruction from the vendor that they've destroyed our confidential information. I wanted to store that with the contract, so it's one-stop shopping for audit to be able to do that. So I was looking for not just contract management workflows, but also the ability to create tasks, automated tasks that can go with a contract. So the next thing I'm working on, as an example, is I'm working on a standardized vendor performance form. So right now I have them do vendor performance notes in the general notes of the contract, but I'm going to build a form in Agiloft that'll do that for me and automate the sending of that out on some period, every 6 months, every year. I haven't quite settled on that yet. So when looking at roadmaps, I wanted something like that. And then another thing I wanted to look at was, what are they doing in terms of AI or any kind of advanced IT analytics like that. And so Agiloft was the one in my price range that I was looking at that was also actively looking at that. And then specifically how to take existing standard clauses in a contract that we might want, and then have a comparison tool for that clause versus the clause of whatever vendor contract comes in. And we saw that was something that Agiloft was working on, and so that was one of those kind of check the box in my head that says, wow, they're really looking at this product not as a static product with small quality of life updates, but really big things. So those were some of the things we looked at.
Great stuff. Guys, you're going to hear me pick up the pace a little bit. There's a lot of questions I want to get through. The audience has been sending them in, so thanks for that. Hero, I mean, this has got to be one for you, I think. How much does Agiloft help during implementation, integration, and migration? And the person who submitted it is saying, should I hire a consultant to help me? Can you maybe give us a bit of an idea how you guys approach that? Clearly, there are people listening who want to know.
Yeah, I think so. Implementation is a big part of our approach. We have, I mentioned the satisfaction guarantee earlier, and a lot of that is to do with implementation. So we take a pretty hands-on approach. We do work with consultants, systems integrators, depending on size of the enterprise, how much integration they want to do with the existing systems and so on. But implementation is part of Agiloft's differentiators, I would say. We have a 99.7% success rate for installing the software. So that's probably why we have the confidence to give the success guarantee. And I forget the exact figure, but it's in the high 90s. Also in terms of coming in at or under budget for implementation services. So the answer is yes. It's part of the package.
Excellent. Good to cover that. Thank you very much. Matt, I'm going to throw this one your way. The listener wants to know how you guys enhanced the procurement and vendor interaction for the purchasing departments, and what you implemented to provide this, and then thinking about, I guess, how Agiloft supported that, but more generally as well, how did you think about that procurement vendor interaction when it came to purchasing? Was that where did that sit within the roadmap? How did you make sure you got that right?
Boy, am I glad somebody asked that question, because I completely missed that. Okay, great. So from the procurement side, what I really wanted to capture, and we really started capturing through the process, is basically all the communication that goes back and forth. in your CLM, and I guess I'll speak specifically to Agiloft because it's what I have the most experience with. So in Agiloft, every contract has an emails tab. So if you're using Agiloft to help manage your communications back and forth, all of the communications relative to a contract are captured in Agiloft. So is every version of Redlines that go back and forth. But really what was powerful for me is to be able to see the entire evolution of the negotiation, that the parts that have gone through email. So from a vendor interaction standpoint, when we do a contract, we'll put the contract into Agiloft. If it's a vendor contract, it'll go into our legal team. We'll get the first set of red lines back. Then it automatically comes back to procurement and the business owner for us to look at it and say, okay, here's what legal's recommending. If you need further explanation on it, let me know. So we can open a dialogue with our internal legal to make sure that we understand everything. From then on out, the relationship is between purchasing, the business owner, and the vendor. So we can automatically, with a press of one button, I send the most recent and only the most recent. It's actually pretty cool that I can't send old versions of the contract. It only lets me send the most active version of the contract. So I send that off to the vendor automated by pressing a button. It's got an email template that goes with it. I can customize that on the fly, but I don't have to. Then it goes to the vendor. Any vendor responses to that contract, as long as they hit reply all, it flows directly into my contracting system. And if they don't, if they screw that part up, I can always upload it into the contract record. So my contract record has this seamless running flow of all communications between us. And then I can make the decisions, are these things that I can negotiate myself? Are these things that I'll go to my legal team to help me negotiate on? There will always be conversations, side conversations that you'll have, or like a phone call that you'll have. But I'll tell you, it has cut down my back and forth with suppliers, either on the phone or in email, probably by 20 or 30%, just being able to capture all of that and have all of that history so that on a particularly long or difficult negotiation, I've always got a fallback position to go back and say, well, wait a minute, I thought we agreed on X. And I can go back to my emails and say, yep, and I can do that in the contract record, not using any other tools or having them stored in multiple places. So that's certainly helped there. Now, what we haven't implemented yet is using Agiloft for yearly vendor reviews. So that's something that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, where we could build out a vendor scorecard as a form in Agiloft, and then use that as the, hey, we'll fill out the scorecard and use that for yearly vendor updates. We haven't done that yet, but it's something that's certainly on my short-term roadmap to do.
I mean, that's crucial, right? That whole piece, how we interact with our suppliers. We were talking about earlier, you mentioned it in your presentation about the need to be close to them, to have that visibility, that understanding, that ability, as you were saying, as you guys are looking to do, to be able to kind of make those kind of reviews, and particularly at the moment when when there's so much disruption, to be able to have that level of control and to also give that to your stakeholders at least. Really appreciate you talking us through that, Matt. Hero, question that's come in that I think you're going to be able to answer quite simply, but we've been asked it a couple of times now, so it feels wrong not to give it to you. Do CLM systems integrate with existing ERP and CRM systems like Salesforce? That question around integration in one form or another, I think that's something a lot of people are thinking about as they're looking at how they can use this kind of software. Can you take us through that a little bit?
Well, it's a one-word answer. The answer is yes. It integrates right. With both on the buy side, ERP systems, SAP, Oracle, whatever, and on the sell side, the big one on the sell side is Salesforce, but the integration answer is yes.
You can't really argue with that. So I want to, maybe I'm going to come to you with this one first, and then I want to hear what Matt's got to say. I think we can kind of both have a look. So I'll read the full question, but then I want to kind of hear how you guys approach it, and it may be that we end on this. We'll see. Visibility to the contract lifecycle is one of the most common requests and biggest challenges. Most CMS applications require licenses for every user, even for visibility purposes, which can be cost prohibitive. How do you address this very basic need for visibility? So, I mean, Hero, it's interesting to think about how what you guys do helps the organization to have more of that kind of insight. Can you give us an idea of how you guys approach that, how you think about helping your customers in that way? And then, Matt, maybe you can talk a little bit following on from that.
Okay, so so we don't charge for every user. I know that a lot of SaaS companies will do that, but we have a license structure that it's called an end user license, and it sounds like this question comes from somebody at a large enterprise where there could be thousands of people that need some level of visibility. So we have an enterprise licensing model that accounts for that.
Yeah, and
So
I can build on that a little bit.
Yeah,
please do. So they're basically they've got end user licenses which are the enterprise wide, and then you can have power user licenses that give you some additional functionality. The kind of base visibility that Michael's looking for is available in the end user license. So what I told you about the graphical interface where you can kind of see, hey, it's in legal. Hey, it's at the vendor. It's active. Ooh, it's pending renewal. Right? You can see all that in the end user license, the base end user license. So that very basic need for visibility is addressed by their end user license.
Very nicely covered. Okay, guys, that is all we've got time for, unfortunately. Still more questions in. So a couple of things I want to make everybody who's listening today aware of, so don't go away just yet. A few of you have been asking, can I access this? So we will be sending around a link to the recording post-event, so you can kind of, you're able to kind of re-access the today's webinar. We'll be delighted to kind of, give you another chance to pull out the insights there. We're also going to be asking you for your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. I'm delighted to have had such a great panel here kind of talking you through that. But if you have any feedback for us in general, we'd love to hear from it. And if I would say, if it's, the questions that you've submitted, if they didn't get answered, and there were quite a few questions there, if they didn't get answered, don't fret. They will be made available to our panel post-event. If there's anything anybody can pick up and come back to you that they think there's something they're able to kind of continue the conversation, they're going to look to do that. So, so don't fret if your questions didn't get answered there. The final thing I wanted to make you aware of. So obviously, Procurement Leaders runs a lot of excellent webinars, and we would love to keep inviting you to those. But I want to also make you aware that Agiloft have got their webinar series, and we're lucky enough to be part of that. But then, September the 2nd, September the 9th, you can see that on the slides there. And if you want to go to agiloft.com, you can see the full schedule. So do check out their webinar series as well. And particularly thinking about, the moats that they're going to kind of go into there around CLM and how that, this general idea of kind of contract management, revolutionizing it and taking control. So do keep an eye out for that. Okay, finally, just want to say a big thank you to Matt and Hero. Guys, great job. It's been lovely having you here, and thank you for taking us through your respective parts of the world. Brilliant stuff. And a big thanks, of course, to Agiloft for partnering with us today. And finally, thanks for those of you who've joined us. We hope you found it enlightening. We hope you took away some nuggets of insight you can take back to your organization, and we would love for you to join us again next time.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Indeed. Thank you all.